Welcome to iNN's Headlines and Beyond for week 20 of 2015. We're still working only on a weekly edition of this analysis program because we are getting into things that are more complex. We are looking at things in a more analytical fashion. And as a result, the shows can get rather heavy beyond what most people would find let's say palatable. In other words, many people find this too lengthy for them. But the thing is, if you do want to understand what's going on, if you really do want to get a grip on what's happening in the world, well, this is the analysis that's required. You can't simply take a sort of a glossing over of events. A lot of the events that are occurring in the news actually occur within history. They have a whole historical context to them. And if you understand this, then you understand that in many cases the results that will be coming should be expected because they happened before in history. In other words, events are not isolated. They're not brand new. We aren't dealing with necessarily new things, but rather we're dealing with old things. This includes the New World Order, or false flags, this whole concept of conspiracy theories. When you examine them, you realize that conspiracy theories aren't new. They've been around for a long time. That the mechanisms behind the conspiracy theories actually have been around for a long time too. You can go back as far as the Crusades to find the mechanisms for for so-called conspiracy theory. And because I do indeed talk about conspiracy theories, there are many people who think, oh, here comes another conspiracy theory nut. The thing is, you've got to understand, if these conspiracy theories are out there, they need to be dealt with. This is part of the analysis. If you simply ignore the conspiracy theories that are out there, then you're not doing proper analysis. You're doing a closed analysis. You're doing analysis, but you're simply ignoring why someone believes in a conspiracy theory or a particular conspiracy theory, because I can demonstrate very easily. And this is why I encourage you to do your research. This is why I encourage you to look at different sources. Confirm what you see here, and understand that I am giving what I see. This is my observation. This is my essay. Based on the notes that are in front of me, the notes that I took, I compiled over about a week, and these notes come from years worth of research. And so it's not a one-off thing where, oh, here's some nutter coming off and just sort of spouting about conspiracy theory. There's a lot of research behind this. And I said I encourage you to do the research as well. This is not something that I say, respect my opinion, respect my credentials. And this is what we'll be talking about today. We're going to continue on in our part 2 of our discussion, which last week we talked about, actually introduced liberalism and postmodernist anarchy. Most people don't understand how the two are related, and that we are in fact in a postmodernist anarchy age. This is the age that we're in. We are not in a modernist philosophical environment. We are in a postmodern anarchical environment. So this is the environment we're in. Of course, well, this is one of the questions that were posed. I mean, this is posed by a variety of different people. The assumption of credibility. Once they can't argue the points. And there's and they really haven't done any of the research. They haven't done any of the reading. And more often than not, they really don't know the history. They have no concept of what was going on prior to their own existence. You'll hear words, well, obviously this person's credentials are not up to par. Obviously, his reputation is not that good. And why is this obvious? I mean, we throw out these accusations in a way of dismissing somebody else's arguments. But the thing is, if you're going into analysis, if you're going to be open-minded, truly open-minded, then you need to understand why. Why is it? Why is this obvious that this person is the way he is, or the way you claim this person to be? Well, why is this particular? What do you feel? What did you see that say, "Oh, obviously"? Where's your evidence? Where's your counter argument? And the thing is, obviously, it's not a counter argument. It's simply an assertion. You simply say, "Well, believe me, he's clearly not reputable. Believe me, his credentials can be questioned." But the thing is that if we're dealing objectively here, we're not looking at things from a subjective point of view, from the point of view that is from within my own mind. We're looking at observation. We're looking at things that are seen, and they can be seen by others, not just by myself. This is an objective view of the world. How does my credentials affect my observations? As I said before, if you're in a liberal environment and everything is concept, and this is what you find in the postmodernist world, everything's concept. So this lens cap exists here that I'm showing you. This lens cap exists simply because of my reputation that I say that exists. That's a lens cap. And you can argue that, no, that is not a lens cap. That is a car or a elephant. And of course, because you have your conceptual truths, you'd be right. And so would I. And we'd never have any degree of agreement with this because we'd have our own particular view of the world. And this would be a lens cap, an elephant, and a car. When you're dealing with something that's objective, this lens cap exists because you don't exist. It has nothing to do with you, really. Your credentials have no impact or bearing on the existence of this lens cap. And that's what it means to be objective. But yet, in many cases here, when you see people who emerge from these liberal educations at most universities, doesn't matter whether you're conservative or whatever you are, if you graduated from a liberal university, from a liberal arts program, that's what your bachelor's degree is, then you've been influenced by liberal thinking, by liberal thought. And that means that you view things according to the credentials or the assumption of credentials and the appearance of reputation. That is a subjective understanding of the world. It is not an objective understanding of the world. And the thing is that there's a difference between the objective world and the subjective world. The subjective world is entirely within the mind. And the objective world is outside the mind. It exists not because of you. And we can go back into our definitions once again. We go back into the definition of subjective. We go into the dictionary and find existing in the mind, belonging to the thinking subject, rather than to the object of the thought. Opposed to objective. And so obviously, if something's within the mind, it's not outside the mind. It's purely within the mind. It says the objective here. This is the definite objective here, right? Of or relating to something that can be known, or to something that is an object or part of an object, existing and here's the thing: existing independent of thought or an observer. There's the thing, existing independent. This lens cap exists independent of me, the observer. And this is the way we do this show here. This is the way we do this analysis here. We take the observer position, and this is how we do observational psychology. It is from the observer position, and we tend to look at things not because of what somebody says they are, but simply from the perspective of the observer. What do I see this is? How do I see this occurring? And the thing is, you can do this in a variety of manners. You can do this by simply reading a book and getting an idea. Okay, well, this is what this book says, and that's what that book says, and not necessarily applying it to anything. Or you can find parallels. You can find, oh yeah, this compares with this compares with that, and give an example here. Going into George Orwell's 1984. George Orwell's 1984 was written in 1949. It was just 5 years after World War II, and They said the universities, the intellectual environment was really in a bad state because they were leaving the modernist world that where you can have this sort of man can be socially engineered, he can be constructed, and we can create a utopian society. We can create a perfect world for us. And so, in the in the collapse of this, in the wake of World War II, you have a lot of what's called, and George Orwell. This is important because he is the grandfather of utopian writing. If you look at any of the dystopian novels, it shows that the dystopian novels. Take the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is George Orwell's 1984. Almost any movie like Mad Max, Hunger Games, any of these movies that were so-called post-apocalyptic, all borrow from George Orwell. He is a key author for people looking at and writing about society and what future society might look like. And in his book, 1984, which was ironically enough was written in 1949, he talks about something known as political speak. That in this government called Big Brother, who takes care of you like a big brother, the government is going to be like is going to be like a parent state to you, and you're not going to have children. Parents don't have children. The state has to. The state brings up the child. It's the state's responsibility to raise the child and give it its morals. And this is the concept of the nanny state. This is the concept of Big Brother that we see today. And whenever we hear about politicians, particularly on the right, talking about the nanny state in soft fascism, well, that's right there in 1984. And they had this whole thing called political speak, and the political speak was the words that you could use that were politically okay to use. Otherwise, if you use and they actually had speech that you could not say, the speech that was illegal. There was illegal speech, and this legal speech, if you spoke this illegal speech or used these terms or thought in that matter, you had a thought that was incorrect, you could be arrested and put into these so-called re-education camps. And ironically enough, these re-education camps, and this existed in Nazi Germany, and they existed in the Soviet Union. So this is very telling. This is historical. This is not my own idea. This is something that is within history. We have a history of liberalism. We have these new world orders of the communist thought, the communist dictate of the world, basically from 1907 to just about 1990. In the Soviet Union, you had the Soviet New World Order that was supposed to be the rule of communism. It was supposed to be global. It was supposed to be around the world, and it didn't succeed. So that was the socialist utopia on the left. You had then also between basically a little after World War II, you had the emergence of the Nazi Party, the National Socialists, and they were going to build a utopia based on the National Socialist ideas. The National Socialist ideas are opposed to the Socialist ideas on the left. They're violently opposed to the Socialist ideas on the left. Both used anarchists as their tools to destruct society, to destroy the society that's in front of them and create a new one. What happens, though, is that the socialism on the right believes in genetics, that think the behavior and everything, that man himself is chemically oriented, is chemically engineered. So therefore, because everything is chemical, man is chemical. Your thoughts are chemical. Things are within the brain. There is no such thing as the mind. Everything is chemically based. That you can chemically engineer the human being. And this is why genetics was so important to these people. The genetics was... this is why Watson and Crick, who later lost their Nobel Prize for the discovery of DNA, was it was found out that Watson and Crick were eugenicists. They believed that you could engineer society. And this is where if you read the comic book, if you wear the comic book Spider-Man, or if you wear the comic book X-Men, and the cartoons that came out of it, and all this sort of different, these superheroes, these superheroes emerge from this environment of social engineering. These are socialist books on how man could possibly engineer. That's what what's the name? Peter Parker, as a chemist in a lab. What was he doing? He was doing chemical engineering. Same thing with Hulk. The Hulk. He was doing chemical engineering. They were engineering man, engineering the perfect man. This is what happens in X-Men, is the perfect chemical engineer. This is the National Socialist idea. This thing also pops up in RoboCop. The engineering of man, the engineering of the perfect man. On the left, on socialism, it was about psychology. It was about the environment around it and influencing how a person develops. And this was all. So on the left, everything on the left was centered around education and re-education. You could train and program a person to behave a specific way without necessarily changing or altering them chemically. And so you have two opposing camps, both socialists, both of them coming out of liberal ideas. This is the modern world. In 1945, when both die, more or less, you have the collapse of modernism and you have the emergence of postmodernism. When we come back, the postmodernist world and how anarchy emerges from that.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're saying, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of our break. When you're watching this program, what you're seeing here, as I said, everything's unedited here. You're seeing the evolution of a program. You're seeing the evolution of a news channel. You're seeing the evolution of a network. There's a PBS type of network. So a lot of things that would not be seen on a regular TV channel, on a regular TV program, are going to be seen here because we're not hiding the development side of things. You're seeing the development side of things. This means you're seeing the imperfections, you're seeing the mistakes, you're not seeing things that are edited. Well, why are we doing this? Because as I said before, and we talked about this before, we are doing an observational program. We're bringing out scientific journaling into the realm of psychology. And from the physics standpoint, when you keep your scientific journal, you don't erase mistakes. You acknowledge them, you note them, but you don't erase them. Mistakes, unpolished thought, flubs, the whole bit, are part of the experience. So they're not edited out. And these are rough notes. These notes, what you're seeing here, the notes that are coming in are slightly more organized, but they're still primarily ad hoc notes. They will form larger documentaries. This will be happening starting next week. I'll be introducing a new documentary series called Insta-Vlogs. These documentary series will be the first note, the first draft of something of content that will eventually become a documentary. And this will be part of the education program. This is part of your education, how you understand things. And as I said before, this is why studies are important. This is why you do your studies. Is you take your notes, you learn from the notes, and as you start to learn notes, you start beginning to formulate thoughts. The thoughts become essays, and the essays eventually become documentaries. And the thing is, what I found more often than not, when people are doing the work, particularly the younger people today, on the liberal side of things, and I've seen this from the comment, they're not aware of the history of liberalism. They're not aware of the structure of liberalism. Even if you're in psychology, say, oh, I'm talking to a psychologist, and she's done 4 years of research. She thinks that her work, that she is at the pinnacle of a particular profession, and that her knowledge gives her a particular position, a particular esteem, where her credentials become the argument. In other words, we see here the liberal mind being formed in a subjective manner. In other words, she is a subjective scientist. She is a subjective psychologist. Her research is subjective. And it's because she came from a subjective environment. That's what she knows. And so she doesn't know how to be objective. She doesn't know how to stand outside her own arguments. To look at her arguments and say, wow, how do I understand what I understand? In other words, she hasn't begun challenging herself yet. And I find particularly, and this is not necessarily true of all women, but I'm using this as the example here, because women do have a tendency to admit, and this is, again, is not necessarily their own fault. This is the environment that's being taught to them. Part of self-esteem in the education of self-esteem is the creation of narcissism. And narcissism has to do all with attitude. It's all about attitude, how you carry things out. And they tell you have to have a certain attitude. It doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. Just keep the attitude there, and your attitude will become your credentials. And this is actually what I see a lot of times in arguments when I'm having an argument with a person. The absolute refusal to understand something or to accept another argument as plausible. Not to accept it completely, but to accept it as plausible and to say, let me take a further look at this. And that doesn't mean you have to look at it right now. It can be, a week from now, whatever. The discussion can continue. But that doesn't happen. What happens is you have a closing off. It's, wow, that's completely wrong, and so on and so forth. And the thing is, they say, well, I have my credentials. You don't know what my credentials are. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what the credentials are. We see this in the definition of objective and subjective. In subjective research, in subjective science, this is the liberal environment, that you see in 90% of the universities are, well, and I'm saying that there might be others that aren't, but the ones that I know of, all your major universities, are all liberal environments. They're all subjective environments. They're all based on the credentials and the appearance of credentials, on reputation, rather than on the actual research itself, rather than on the objective observation. And so in many cases, you do have to stand outside the subjective environment in order to develop an objective point of view. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed at that, but in order to develop a really objective point of view, you have to leave the subjective environment and move to a more objective environment. And if an objective environment does not exist, then you have to create it. But you have to be very careful, because in the process of creating an objective environment, you may end up putting subjective elements in there that, while you may think is objective, it really isn't objective. Well, as I said, going back to here, I said that we can see this within history. We can see the history of liberalism here within George Orwell. We can see that the whole concept of political correctness, we can see the whole concept of the nanny state that the people on the right talk about. We can see it right here. We can see the emergence from the Nazis. We can see the emergence of the X-Men, of Spider-Man. We can see the result of chemical engineering. And we can see the failures of chemical engineering in regards to mankind. And when I'm talking about chemical engineering, I'm also talking about genetic engineering. Because ultimately, genetic engineering is chemical engineering. It's engineering more on the lines of organic chemistry rather than elemental chemistry. Nonetheless, it's chemical engineering. And the thing is, you can see arguments on both sides. And the thing is just the way you can see political correctness in George Orwell in 1984. And again, this is something going back and referencing a book that's, more than 50 years old. I mean, at 2000, let's say 1950 here, 50 years gives you 2000. We're another 15 years in, because we're 2015. So 65 years ago, this book was written in 1984, talking about political correctness. So this whole thing about political correctness and the nature of a soft fascist government, a government that takes care of everything for you, that was written 65 years ago. This is not a conspiracy theory anymore. This now has history to it. You can go back and take a look. We talk about false flags. And the whole concept of false flags, they pop up all the time in conspiracy theories. So, this is the conspiracy theory. Well, not necessarily. And I think let's go back, because I forgot to mention something in George Orwell's 1984. In 1984, the reason why you have this engineering going on, you have the engineering of all science, is they're trying to create the socialist utopia. They're trying to create the perfect society. They're going to engineer it. The social utopia is the New World Order. And you see here now, you have a New World Order defined by the Nazis. That's one New World Order. You have another New World Order defined by the socialists on the left, the liberals, the communists. That's another New World Order. Both New World Orders, by the time 1990 rolled around, both New Worlds, both the Nazi and the Communist New World Order, right, the utopias, collapsed and died. So we have a historical record on the existence of these utopias, of this New World Order, and can say that there is not one New World Order, but there are multiple New World Orders. There's been a history of New World Orders. So it's not a monolithic thing that you talk about the New World Order. And they were never successful at it. They've never succeeded in creating this New World Order. It's always failed. You look at the history, if you go back and look at these histories, they've always failed. They've always destroyed themselves. And this can be seen again in Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. We're talking about the use of different mechanisms to achieve the New World Order. Both sides, the communists and the Nazis, used anarchists in order to bring about their world revolution. And of course, anarchists are driven to what they're doing. They have these protests and stuff like that. And as the protests go, the anarchists come in and they start destroying things. If you look at anything like the World Trade Organization, you look at the different conferences they have around the world, and you see these people in black ski masks smashing windows like McDonald's and banks and stuff like that. Well, those are the anarchists, and they're sent in by both sides, by both the Nazis and the communists, in order to break up society, in order to push their views on society and how things should be socially engineered. And the thing is, people are convinced to do these things, and there's not someone necessarily up there saying, go do something bad. These people are driven by their own beliefs. They believe they're doing something good. And the thing is, the people at the top, the manipulators, the master manipulators, who create these false flags, who create the cause for war, create the cause for the national state, for the police state. Look at those anarchists out there. Look at the rioting. Look at the ISIS. Look at the terrorists out there. You need our protection. And these are false flags. And we say, that's conspiracy theory. There he goes again, talking about conspiracy theory. Well, no, because what am I talking about? I'm talking about Niccolo Machiavelli, 1532. Yeah, 1532. The book was published called The Prince. It was written by Niccolo Machiavelli. He was an Italian prince himself. He was an upper level person. And what's he talking about in his book? He's talking about the use of false flags, the use of terrorism to create national unity. In other words, the concept of false flag. This round this down because he wrote it in 1513, so let's round it down to 1500. 500 years to 2000. And because we're dropping off the 13, let's leave it at 500 years. I don't think that really matters that much if we get into the decades. But 500 years ago, there's a book written on false flags. This is not conspiracy theory. This is history. Understand, and this is why the reading is important. And when you hear someone commenting on the program saying, all he's doing is talking about false flag, he's talking about conspiracy theory, he's a conspiracy theory nut. They obviously haven't watched the video, because here I am talking about history, and I've told everyone who's watched the program, anyone who has actually watched this program, knows I've said the base reading for this program is George Orwell's 1984 and Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. These are essential to understanding global politics. Oh, wow, these books cost money. Who can go out and buy these books? Well, there's a place called Gutenberg. There's a project on the internet called Gutenberg Press, the Gutenberg Project. I'll leave it in the link down below, in the description down below, just like I have for the university. And it's called Gutenberg.org. And they have The Prince there and George Orwell's 1984 for free. As a matter of fact, there's an entire library there that you can build your. So I said the university that I have, the Open University, is built on a library. You build your courses. Everything you study is built from the library. Well, how do you get a free library? Well, the Gutenberg Project has a free library. You can download all these ebooks for free, and these are historical ebooks. You can get old books from there. And the old book, if you really want to go back and study history from the first hand, you want to really understand where things came from, then you study history. But you don't have to study history from a textbook. You go to the original source. You don't read about The Prince talked about by some educator in a textbook. You go and get the book The Prince and you read it yourself. You want to find out what Nietzsche says, because Nietzsche is one of these philosophers who is important to history. You want to find out what he says? Don't listen to what somebody else says about Nietzsche. Go look up the name Nietzsche, find out who Nietzsche was, and then go find his books. His books are out there. And this is the same thing for George Orwell. You can do an author study on George Orwell by looking for all his books out there. Same thing with Fyodor Dostoevsky. Niccolo Machiavelli. You can read more of it. He's got other books that are out there. You want to look into psychology, into the history of psychology, how things were studied. Well, that's Stanley Milgram and Dr. Philip Zimbardo. Those are the two places to start. From there, once you have an understanding of Stanley Milgram and Dr. Philip Zimbardo, you can do the studies on LSD. And then you can also do the studies on MK Ultra. And that will start giving you a really good background into what's actually going on. You could begin to see that, hey, not everything brought out in the news is real. Matter of fact, if you start really looking into these things, you begin to realize that 95% of what's brought out in the news is false. That there's so much that's left out. The news is fundamentally false. And when we come back on the other side of things, because we are coming right to the end of our segment here, we're going to get into the Open University. We'll talk a little bit more about the Open University and where you can go with these studies. And the second thing is we're going to get into the psychology of evil. We're going to get into the creation of a psychopathic society within the postmodern society and how it leads to the destruction of society. How the postmodern society, if you look at the history of these so-called New World Order socialist utopias, they were self-destructive. They destroyed themselves. And we can apply this history to what's happening now with the whole thing with the LGBTA, with the homosexuality, with the open sexuality laws. This is not something new. This was there is historical record on this. When we come back on the other side, we will continue.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're seeing, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for, $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN. Promote, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of our program. Of the break. Not of the program, but of the break. I said you'll have to excuse our flubs and mistakes. It is, in many cases, exhausting doing the work here. And you do, with all the notes that are here, you do have a tendency to get lost in the notes. And because we don't want to edit things, we don't want to leave things out, you want to see where all the mistakes are. This is journaling here. This is how you maintain a journal. This is how you maintain a scientific log. We're going to use that format here. And because we're looking at things from the point of view of observational psychology. This is a science here. And as I said before, we're doing this in an objective fashion. We're looking at objective science. We're trying to create an objective environment rather than a subjective environment that you find at most universities. I already said before and defined before that most universities are in a subjective environment. They are a subjective environment. They emerge from a subjective environment. They continue to be a subjective environment. They're about the credentials, the assumption of credentials. They're about the assumption of reputation as well. So, when you want to step outside, you do have, if there's nothing outside there for you to be outside in an objective, if there is no objective environment for you to step into, then one needs to be created. And that's sort of was my situation more than 15 years ago. And I created something known as an open university called Academia University. And to be an open university, to be a free university, you can't restrict people from coming in. And that's the way I've done it. There's no entrance fee. There's no cost to come in. There's no mark requirements to come in. If you want to come in, you're in. And all you have to do here, the only, if you really want to be picky about it, the only restrictions are is you have to, one, be on the internet, and two, and that can be done in any, if you have a laptop and you can get to a library. Let's say you don't have a laptop. If you can get to a library and get one of those thumb drives, those little thumb drive things look like this, and you get a thumb drive, you can now store your entire university education in a good sized library on one of these things. So, and I think the university program, the Academia University, is library based. It's open to all levels. Anyone who wants to can come in. It doesn't matter what past education you have or haven't had. It's self-paced. You can move at your own rates and so on and so forth. And I use Google Plus as our primary platform. Google Plus is free. You can sign into it from a library. It's library accessible. I encourage you, once you do Google Plus, to go set up a YouTube account. And this is where you can present all your work. You can present all your work so that the other people can see it, so that I can see it and review your work. It's more important for other people to see your work rather than just myself. Let other people see the work you're doing. Let other people comment. Yeah, they're going to be negative. There are people out there who are going to be negative, who are going to be nasty. But this is what you're going to have to learn how to do. Learning how to be objective is in many ways learning how to criticize yourself, to accept criticism. And so actually putting your work out there is actually a good idea because this is what allows you to do. Mark ABC or whatever, those marks, the GPA, really doesn't matter in an objective environment. What it matters is how you understand the world. And when someone comments on your work, good or bad, it forces you to think on how to respond to that person. Sometimes you'll be successful and have a good conversation, and other times you're not going to be successful. You're not going to be able to have a discussion because that person is going to be so closed-minded, so certain of what he believes in, that they're not going to accept whatever you say because, well, you don't have the right credentials. Now, and that's going to be the argument. Oh, you do not have the right credentials. And so it doesn't matter what evidence. It doesn't matter what evidence you bring up. It doesn't matter what your objective observations are, because they're only looking at your credentials. If you don't have the right credentials for them, then everything else is dismissed. And therefore, That's why Google Plus is a good place to do it, because you can also you connect it to YouTube, and you have a very good platform for presenting your work. Obviously, because there are no classes, it's done on the internet. It's all self-paced, independent study. Set whatever time schedules you want. Because I said before, it's all about reading and studying. It's library science based. You learn how to build a library, and library is simply going out and collecting books and organizing them into subjects into the way you think the library should be organized, or, based on your experience. And as your experience changes, you'll realize that, or understand that libraries can be organized in a variety of different manners. And your way may not be the same as somebody else's, but if it works for you, it works. And a library is simple. As a base library, your base library can all be stored in here. And from there, from your base library with English, history, science, and whatever the sciences are, the mathematics, you can develop a full course load and get a very good education out of it. And so that's it. All independent study, all self-paced, open to all levels. And because we are open to all levels, I decided that, and it is for all levels, then I can extend the program, the undergraduate program, down to younger people from grade 3 on up. If you're younger than grade 3, you don't really necessarily need it. You can join if you want to, but if you're younger than grade 3, then it really doesn't matter. Because the books you have at home should be sufficient. As long as you learn how to read and write and do some basic mathematics, that's good enough before grade 3. So I created something called the Undergraduate Extension Program. It extends the program, the undergraduate program, down to grade 3. And that means if you're 8 years old and up, you can come into the UEP, the Undergraduate Extension Program. And this is a private program for young people, because I don't want. There are many cases where I don't want young people mixing with adults. They need to have a place on their own to think of their own ideas, not to be bullied by adults. Let their ideas develop and form. And the thing is, not all adults are good people. This is something that has to be realized. Not all adults are good people. So there is a public campus for the undergraduate extension program, and then there's also a private campus. To get into the private campus, the parents of the student or the student himself will have to submit ID to showing me that you are a student, that you are under 18 years old. And as long as you can demonstrate that you're under 18 years old, then you'll be admitted. I'll add you to the private student campus for the undergraduate extension program. So there is a public campus for the undergraduate extension program, and then there's a private campus. To get into the private campus, you need to show me that you are under 18 years old. And once that's done, I'll add you to the private campus, and you can have access to the private campus. So there's a public campus for everybody else, and there's also a private campus for the undergraduate extension program for the students from 8 years old all the way up. So that being said, as we're going into the psychology of what's going on. I've mentioned before about the whole thing about the definition of subjective and objective, and I found out as I was reading through some of the stuff and meeting different people online. And this, I don't mind. And people ask me, well, don't you mind having arguments with people who are significantly inferior to your level of intellect? But the thing is, I don't. And if you're open-minded, if you're looking at observation really as an observation, then you don't object to meeting someone who is not the way, who doesn't think the way you do. You actually welcome it because it forces you to think about what you know and how you know what you know. And this doesn't matter whether the person's 5 years old, 15 years old, or whatever. Even if they're attacking you, even if the point of view is negative, there is still an experience. There is still an experience there to be had. There is something to add to your library. And I found that going back into looking back at psychology, and I've actually met students in psychology now. These are people that either they've done their first 2 years in psychology at university, or they're now doing a graduate work, and they've had some research experience in a lab working with on laboratory psychology. And most laboratory psychology is fundamentally textbook psychology. It can all be classified as textbook psychology because it really doesn't move outside of the textbook environment. In other words, the textbooks provide the theoretical environment, and this is the way classical science is. Classical science under, and they don't actually call it classical science. It's actually, they call it modern science. Modern science, the experimentation is simply to demonstrate the theory. The theory works. In other words, it's a demonstration of theory. It's not for exploration. It doesn't do anything else other than confirm the existing theory. However, that's not objective. That's subjective. And as I said before, you do have subjective research. You do have subjective science. But we have, with quantum physics and quantum mechanics, and this is what killed modernism in 1945, the real killer, the real knife in the back of modernism was quantum physics. Because quantum physics took science, which was deterministic, could be determined. You could have your expertise in there, and it said science was not deterministic, but rather it was probabilistic. That you could not have an absolute determination of anything. That you can only get things to a certain degree of knowledge, and after that certain degree of knowledge, rather than having absolute knowledge, you have uncertainty. And so, in all cases, in the quantum universe, in the quantum mechanics, you have uncertainty. And since 1945, you've had group after group after group, cognitive scientists, everything in psychology, anyone that doesn't go into quantum physics, all these academics are trying to put the genie back in the bottle. They're trying to recreate the modernist environment they had prior to postmodernism. But they continuously fail. And this is where you start seeing liberal intolerance and liberal ignorance. When you see this whole thing, they talk about moral philosophy and moral theory, looking beyond the standard Christian view. Well, what is that Christian view? The Christian view of morality is, well, not even Christian, because it emerged from the Roman Catholic Church after 1000 A.D. The Catholic Church, after 1000 A.D., modified itself. It became Roman Catholic. The church prior to 1000 A.D. was nothing like the church that emerged after 1000 A.D. And this is why you had the split in the church between East and West. This is why you had the Crusades. The Crusades was not to go and wipe out the Arab and take back the Holy Lands. The Crusades was there to wipe out the Eastern Church so that the Pope can come up and say, the Western Church was the original church, and there was no church prior to the Western Church. This is the origin of papal primacy. Right? In order to argue papal primacy, they have to get rid of the Eastern Church. They have to get rid of Eastern Orthodoxy. Everybody needs to be under the Pope. So this was the reason for the Crusades. And this is why in 1066, the Battle of Hastings was considered to be the first crusade. And it wasn't against the First Crusade, 1066, the Battle of Hastings. Go look that up. It's in history. And there's history on this whole thing being called the First Crusade. It was not against Muslims. It wasn't against Arabs. It was against the English people. It was against the Scottish. Why? Because the Scottish Church, the Celtic Church, refused to join with Rome. They wanted to stay an independent church. This is the way it was. Prior to the advent of the Roman Catholic Church, 1000 A.D., all churches, all jurisdictions were independent. One bishop could not go into another area and dictate how that bishop should handle his area. That was not acceptable to Rome after 1000 AD. After 1000 AD, Rome was the center of everything. The center of authority was the Pope. And if you did not fall in line, they would make you fall in line at the point of a sword. And that's what happened with the Battle of Hastings. They went in, they wiped out all the early Christian churches in Scotland and all across the UK, and installed and created new churches based on the Roman ideals. And there's a whole history on this. If you look at the documentaries on the Tudor monasteries coming out of BBC, it does a half decent job introducing some of these different ideas. But the thing is, we see here that social utopias are not new. They've always been around, and they've always failed. And part of the problem with the failure is it has to do with this moral theory. That moral does not have to be necessarily do with Christian, even though when they talk about Christian morals, they're only looking at their own Catholic. They haven't looked at morals across the world. All they have to do is look at India to understand that there are societies that have existed in history that have dealt with multiple or plural moralities. And they've failed. Look at India today. Look at the rapes that are going on in India today. Even Indians aren't happy with what they see in the paper with the rapes that are going on a daily basis. That's a pluralistic society. That's a society where there are multiple moralities. There are multiple truths. So we see the failure of moral theories that, wow, there's really a social contract out there. There's no social contract. We've seen the failures under the social contract for the Nazis. That failed. We've seen the social contract under communism. That failed. We saw it again in Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. We saw what happened there. We saw the killing fields. So we know these things have failed. We know there's a history of failure there. Yet, time and time again, students are still taught these old theories in school by these communist academics who believe in the liberal idea, and they keep trying to put the pieces back into the bottle. Keep trying to put this. Modernism is Humpty Dumpty. He's fallen off the wall and he's split into a million pieces. And these postmodernist academics are continually trying to put back together Humpty Dumpty, but they never find all the pieces, and it always falls apart again. When we come back on the other side, the evil psychology, how this evil emerges and how it emerges in society, and it's been known. We'll talk about Ferguson, we'll talk about Baltimore riots. All that stuff was known. It's not about race. On the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. I'm your host for Headlines and Beyond on iNN. If you like the show we're saying, I do not monetize my channel because there's a lot of copyright issues with this. It creates a lot of problems. So how do I make my money? Well, if you like this show, it's very simple. We do it the PBS format. I ask you for a donation, but I'm not going to ask you for a lot. Or, well, all you have to do is, if you have $1 or $2 in your pocket, take it out, put it in an envelope. I'll give you the address. It will be in the description of my channel. Go to the channel description, go to About, and you'll see the address to send the $1 or $2 that you send. All I'm asking for $1 or $2. If you got $1 or $2 in your pocket, stick it in an envelope. Send it to iNN. That's iNN. The address is 87 Telson Road. It's 87 Telson, Telson Road. That's in Markham, Ontario. Postal code is L3R184. And I thank you for your support. Alrighty.
iNN, promote, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back to the other side of our break. And we're going into the psychology of evil, the psychology of being psychopathic and society and the pedophilia that goes along with a lot of these socialist societies, the socialist utopias. And this is where we get into one of our studies that we have down below called MK Ultra. MK Ultra is often talked about in the conspiracy theory circles. And this is how we begin to understand whether conspiracy theory is plausible or not. Everyone talks about MK Ultra, and this is what you hear out of your standard conspiracy theorists. But they rarely ever bring in a lot of the research that would have sort of indicate whether MK Ultra was actually there or not, nor do they apply it to any particular events that are going on. We're going to do that here now. And what you begin doing is, if MK Ultra is actually a research program, you begin looking for different hallmarks, different experimentations to show that MK Ultra was indeed a research program. And the thing is, research programs always are broken up into components. They have timelines. You have different groups working on it depending on how large the project is. And so you would expect that the program from MK Ultra will be spread out over basically from the 1930s all the way up to the 1960s and beyond. So the first one we took a look at, the first one I looked at was based on Abu Ghraib. We'll back to Abu Ghraib and sort of see who talked about Abu Ghraib. And one of the psychologists who popped up and talked about Abu Ghraib and the situation that occurred in the prison there was a guy named Dr. Philip Zimbardo, and he's one of the people I have on the list, our studies list. He did his work in 1970. You can go back, you can actually see the films, you can see the discussions on his film. And they actually have the film there. And what he tried to do is he tried to recreate, at Stanford University, in the basement of Stanford University, he tried to recreate the simulation of a prison to see what would happen to the guards in these particular prison situations. And so he chose a group of people at random. He really did do a random job of sort of picking people. And then he split that group that he got, he split them into two. One were going to be the prisoners and the other one were going to be the guards. And he chose himself because he thought he was sufficiently minded, open-minded, that if something went wrong, he'd be able to step in and correct it. This was the thought, this was the thing. And you can actually see this, these videos are out there, the whole video for the experiment's out there. So you can see this for yourself. This is something you can actually see for yourself. This is not an interpretation in terms of watching the video. No one's interpreting the video for you. You can actually see yourself what happens. And the situation very quickly, within a couple of days, breaks down into very sadistic behavior on the part of the guards. Guards who, and these guards did not come in there sadistic. And they weren't chosen, pick somebody with a sadistic mind, pick somebody with a, mental issues that would become sadistic. Because the initial screening was not who was going to be the guard and who wasn't going to be the guard. The initial screening was a random group of people. They got a random group of people from the screening. And then after the screening, after they had that group of people, then they split their group 50-50. So there really wasn't a direction. There wasn't any sort of undue influence in who became the guards and who didn't become the guards. So there really shouldn't have been a factor that said, oh, you chose somebody who was psychopathically minded, or had psychopathic tendencies. But this is actually what emerged. You see the sadistic and brutal side of people who were average people. What happened to them? How they became when they had this position of authority. And as I began doing looking at doing some research on Dr. Philip Zimbardo, a name popped up, Stanley Milgram. And I found his programs. I found all the documents on his research program. I found a lot of his work. I found a lot of essays on his work. I also found a lot of video footage from his experiments. The video footage is the best because you can when you're reading something, you have to interpret things. And interpretation, if you're doing observation, is very dangerous because you put your interpretation can actually blind you from seeing what's actually there. When you're watching a video, you can see things in the video, in the behavior, in the manner, how the person speaks. You can see things in a video that you cannot see when it's written. So when I got the video, I sat down and watched the video from Stanley Milgram and put it next to the work, the videos from Dr. Philip Zimbardo, and began to realize these videos were connected. What was Stanley Milgram doing? He was testing to see how Nazi authorities got underlings who were primarily Christian. They had what called basic Christian values. How did the Nazi authorities get these average people to do such sadistic things that we saw in post-World War II? When we went into Winter Germany, when the films finally emerged of what was going on in these death camps. People were shocked. How could this be done? Stanley Milgram in 1950 did a research project to look into that. How does authority get somebody to do something that sadistic, that horrible? And he found it right there. And Dr. Phyllis Lombardo's experiment, 1970, is put together, looking at how authority creates abusive situations out of normal people. And we go back and look at it and say, whoa. You'll look at Philadelphia, look at Ferguson. You begin to realize and watch how the police are behaving. And you go into YouTube and do a search, police abuse. Start watching through these videos. You begin to realize that there's a pattern there. All these we're seeing from the police, everything we saw in the police abuse, everything we saw in Ferguson, everything we saw in Baltimore, was in the experiments by Stanley Milgram and Dr. Philip Zimbardo. The exact same things. They've known about this since 1950. If they've known about this from 1950, they've actually done the research from 1950. Why didn't it reach the textbooks? Because none of the stuff has actually gotten into the textbooks. There's known as the psychology of evil, the psychology of torture. It's not in textbooks. Why don't you find it in textbooks? But the thing is, you do find it in textbooks. You don't find it in the standard psychology textbooks. You have to go into psychological warfare. If you go into the textbooks on psychological warfare, you go into a specialized version of psychology, into psychological warfare, you'll find this stuff. And here's where the irony comes in. They've known about this they've been doing these experiments since 1930. 1930s, you go back and you look, and they say, well, what other experiments were they doing? And you talk about MKUltra, and one thing pops up is the LSD experiments. And yeah, they were experimenting on the on the American population with LSD. And you begin to realize MKUltra was about the psychology of pain and torture. MKUltra was about psychological warfare. That's what it was. MKUltra was the psychology of warfare. And none of the stuff ended up in the standard psychology. You begin to realize that there's two psychologies out there. There is the standard textbook psychology, which is meant for the general public. And then there is the psychology of warfare, psychological warfare. Two totally different things. Understanding this, you can see that the cops, the way the police behave, the way they're trained, was by design. Cops and police are trained to behave the way they are, to kill people, even innocent people, in these situations, by design. All of a sudden now, the nice government, the nice big brother, isn't so nice. You now begin to start seeing the face and the hand of fascism. In this fashion, you just look at, well, who were the progressive governments? Who created a lot of this stuff? Who was working in these areas? These so-called progressive areas, the progressive social engineers. And you'll find a lot of pedophiles involved. You find people who, as psychiatrists, as psychologists, openly experimented on people in very sadistic and psychopathic manners. And they turned around and said, this is science. And they understand that with this whole thing of the psychology of torture, psychology of pain, that you can actually condition people in this thing. People can become conditioned. Instead of having a negative response to pain, they can have a positive response to pain. In other words, you rape somebody. Instead of being angry and upset, they're laughing. They say thank you. And then in many cases, they'll even ask for more. This is the psychological conditioning of the slut. This is the psychological conditioning of the whore. And this is now part of the psychological conditioning, the psychological education. Remember? Talk about education camps for the social left. That education is important to them. And the youth are important to them. Well, here it is. Right? Sex education. Teaching kids to be sexual objects. To be sexual beings. To accept, by condition, the sexual environment that they're going to be going into. This is what we see also when we look at the psychology of cult and cult members, and how cult members need to be deprogrammed. before you can release them. In other words, a person, you take a person out of a cult, that person has been so psychologically conditioned, so programmed, that the cult member more likely than not will return to the cult, even if they end up being killed in the cult. This same conditioning, the same mental state exists with prostitutes, with whores, and even with the girls we call sluts. They are psychologically conditioned. So even though they're experiencing something that's horrible, that's degrading, that's demeaning, that subjugates them, when freed, they'll go right back to what they started, where they were, because the psychological conditioning wasn't broken, it wasn't changed. So the program kicks in and they send them right back to where they were. Right back into the drug addiction, right back into the alcoholism again. And then more often than not, these people die in this situation. It kills them. And yet we see more and more people talking, going and say, we have to talk about the reality of sexual situation today. Well, what is the reality of the sexual situation today? No one cares about that people are being raped. No one cares about rape. And I've talked to a number of people about this. Asked them, they talk about feminism. Okay, how many people protested when the IMF head of the IMF, what's his name, ended up raping the hotel maid? Very few. How many people protested? How many feminists protested outside the White House when Bill Clinton was sexually abusing Monica Lewinsky? Let's call it what it is. It wasn't sexual harassment. It was sexual abuse. He knew what he was doing. He knew he was attacking her. He knew he was abusing her. He knew the abuse. This was his way of getting satisfaction. No arguments. No protests. How many protests and pickets do you see around Playboy? How many protests and pickets do you see around any of the left-leaning modeling industry? Go to New York. Go to these places like what's the name? Vogue and any of these magazines. Go to these fashion houses, the fashion magazine. What protests by feminists do you see? None. As soon as something's political, oh yeah, there's tons of protests. And this is what I talk about. This is, wow. People say, oh, all politicians they're equally bad. Okay, well, I brought up last week, and this is again from the news, Theodore Ted Stevens, the senator for Alaska. He was the senator for 60 years in Alaska, until about 2008. There was a major push by the liberal left to get rid of all of these senators from Alaska, and from a lot of Republican senators. It was a very nasty playbook brought up by James Carville. He was known as the Raging Cajun. He was the mastermind. He was the constructor, the designer behind the Clinton campaigns, which is basically a scorched earth politics that you destroy. You set out to destroy your opponent. It's not about being nice. This is raw, rough and tumble, street battling politics. There's nothing nice about this. And what happens here is you have Senator Ted Stevens being charged with gross misconduct and sort of misappropriating money. He obviously ends up losing the campaign in 2008. But right before he's convicted, after he's lost the campaign, there's an investigation into the prosecutor who's bringing the case against him. And they found that the prosecutor was fundamentally lying. They actually charged the prosecutor with gross prosecutorial misconduct. Same thing happens here in Canada. Right? Mike Duffy is on trial now. His crime is billed at $90,000. And there's huge trial. Look at any newspaper. His name is Mike Duffy. Mike, Duffy. Right? In Canada. He's a conservative senator. Was former conservative senator. $90,000 is his crime. Ontario Liberal gas plants cancellation, right? The costs this is from the auditor, $1 billion. One of the people involved, Kathleen Wynne, is now Premier of Ontario. There have been no charges laid to date. So ask yourself, are all things equal? Anyways, next week we'll continue on. We'll get further in. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras, and I thank you for joining us at iNN's Headlines and Beyond. Have a good day.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.